and it's completely unknown to you. All right. And I'll admit, while the most interesting part of this entire story is the threesome, which, that is actually something quite interesting to talk about, I personally feel like the most interesting thing for me was the fact that a man quite literally stayed still just so that he could watch.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. He is also a man who may include running his mouth to his cardio routine. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. And I am here because we need to break some traditions, or at least our beliefs need to be broken into and reprogrammed, because it's like shit is changing out here and we're not catching up with the times. And I say that because we have civilized people taking stances that others may consider to be wild, and then we have wild animals doing wild shit. And don't get me wrong, I don't say wild shit meaning that like what they're doing is supposed to be what they're doing. It's like, even by wild animal standards, like what they're doing, or at least what some of them are doing, is also quite wild. Because it kind of goes against the idea that most people have whenever it comes to, just animals and some of the stuff that they do that is very comparable to the relationships that we as animals that are human beings also do. And that's just the first part of it. Like, once I get to the civilized people and some of the stances that people might have started taking, like, I feel like it won't be as wild, but it'll open things up for quite a bit of discourse. And while I might like the idea of being controversial just as much as the other guy, I always like getting to a conclusion that can be good for both sides, or at least that seems to be the most logical or just the best idea of what a good conclusion from the entire discussion is. And should you like the conclusion, should you not like it, should you want to give a different form of feedback, or should you want to suggest a potential topic I should be discussing, then you can always hit me up on the social media. The handles are usually the same, they're in the description, and they rarely ever change. And when you go to any of those social media platforms and you stumble upon the page, a nice follow would be appreciated. Because well, having lots of followers gives some credibility, and then I can get in guests and I can have interviews, stuff like that. And of course there's some of the other things that it usually comes with, but I don't even care all that much about that. Like, I care about giving the podcast more credibility, so that as it grows, people want to hop onto the podcast and give their views, their feedback, and like, not just anyone, but like actual professionals, people that speak on certain subjects that I believe would be very instrumental to adding to some of these conversations. But all in all, I thank you so much for listening all the way till here, and I hope you do listen all the way till the end, and give your feedback afterwards, hopefully, or even as you're listening. Multitasking isn't a bad thing. But with all of that said, I probably should be getting into what it is that I intend on talking about. And yes, I did mention wild animals doing wild shit. So you know what? I'm going to start with that. Now, there is a story that I recently stumbled upon where a researcher endured about an hour in freezing water to capture, and this is probably one of the wildest things I'd ever thought I'd be talking about, and that is sharks having a threesome. Yeah. Like, apparently sharks were having a threesome, or at least a certain species of sharks were having a threesome, and the best part is it lasted around about 110 seconds. I don't know if that's the best part or the worst part, but all in all, I do have the story here because there's definitely questions about this entire thing. And before I can start giving my thoughts on it, I'll just read the article real quick, which says, and I quote, Dr. Hugo Lassource from the University of the Sunshine Coast achieved what no scientist had accomplished before, filming the complete mating sequence of Indo-Pacific leopard sharks, aka Stegostoma tigrinum, in their natural habitat. Published in the Journal of Ethology, his extraordinary footage shows two male sharks sequentially mating with a single female in waters of New Caledonia, behavior never before documented in this critically endangered species. The rare observation required extraordinary patience and timing. While monitoring sharks at Arbor Reef as part of a year-long conservation program, Lassource spotted a female with two males gripping her pectoral fins on the seafloor. Recognizing the significance, he waited motionless in freezing water for an entire hour until sharks began their mating ritual. I told my colleague to take the boat away to avoid disturbance, and I started waiting on the surface, looking down at the sharks almost motionless on the seafloor, he recalled. The entire sequence lasted just 110 seconds but provided invaluable scientific data. The first male mated for 63 seconds, followed immediately by the second male for 47 seconds. Afterward, both exhausted males collapsed motionless on the seafloor while the energetic female swam away, bearing visible bite marks on her fins from the male's grip. This discovery carries profound conservation implications for a species facing extinction. Dr. Kristin Dudgeon, a leading leopard shark researcher, emphasized the importance of the footage. From a genetic diversity perspective, we want to find out how many fathers contribute to the batches of eggs laid each year by females. The research could identify critical mating habitats requiring protection and improve artificial insemination programs for shark reintroduction efforts across multiple countries. The breakthrough transforms our understanding of these mysterious creatures that can switch between sexual and asexual reproduction, a survival strategy crucial for their endangered status. End quote. Okay. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like the wildest part wasn't even the threesome. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's someone who's probably listening and they're like, oh shit, you're telling me sharks can have threesomes? Like that, well, I'll be very honest, that is actually quite wild. And, no one would have really expected such a thing to happen. But I guess that's usually what happens whenever things happen chini ya maji. Like, whenever you don't expect shit to happen, shit is probably happening and it's completely unknown to you. Alright, and I'll admit, while the most interesting part of this entire story is the threesome, which, that is actually something quite interesting to talk about, I personally feel like the most interesting thing for me was the fact that a man quite literally stayed still just so that he could watch 3 leopard sharks shagging. Like, that shit is wild though. Like, that's how you know that guys will usually never cock block a good situation from happening. Like, when the niggas want to win, they'll win. But also, leopard sharks are hoes, which is wild though. But anyways, maybe I shouldn't be saying that leopard sharks are hoes, because, like, it was a threesome and, they were 2 dudes and, okay, it definitely does sound hoish if you put it in the human context. But still, maybe there's mating context around this that justifies it. It's just that when I think of a situation like that, like, on one end, I'm like, are there that few female leopard sharks that 2 males were like, yo, like, let's tag team this one? Or was it a situation where the reason why they are probably endangered is because some of them are hoes like this and the others that aren't hoes, are giving it to just one leopard shark and they're having all of the eggs, while these other female leopard sharks are busy choosing to do it with like multiple, male leopard sharks, all in a bid to get additional energy and not necessarily have to deal with any eggs. Because you want to know something interesting? Like, that shit sounds almost like the stuff that, some humans do. There's some of them that are into like having a train ran on them, but they're not trying to have kids. And then there's other women that aren't trying to do any of that, and they're the ones that are having kids with like one dude or like maybe a couple of dudes, but it's not like they're doing it with her all at the same time. Like, this is wild shit though. Like, even by human standards, this is wild shit. But now animal standards, even wild animal standards, this is wild shit. Like, it is actually very, very interesting. Now, I'll be very honest, I have read up on like animals a little bit here and there are instances where, one animal mating with, like 2 males of different species can actually have, particularly good results. And, maybe there might be some logic to this, because I've seen an instance where, like, for example, if a cat mates with multiple male cats of different species, that cat can still have, children bearing those genetic markers. And, they'll all look different, but they'll all belong to the same cat mother. And, maybe it's a case of that. Maybe it's a case of, may the most superior genes win. Or, there's not that many females. Let me just, carry most of the eggs and I'll just deliver them. And the ones with the best genetics will probably make for like the next best, generation of leopard sharks. If I was to think about it in a way that would justify such quote-unquote behavior, that would probably be the closest reason why. And it is proof that the animal kingdom usually doesn't give a shit about relationships and loyalty and shit. Like, if it's a matter of genetics and survival of the fittest, like, it can employ stuff like this to make it work. And I don't know, like, I find a situation like this super interesting, and when I see it happen, or at least when I hear about it, when I see stuff like this happen, it does kind of remind you that there's definitely wild shit that can happen. And I'd be very curious to know if like that female leopard shark will give birth to like different types of leopard sharks and shit because it's gotten it from two males, and see how that entire thing unfolds. But I guess I might be forced to subscribe to It's Only Sharks, since it didn't mind being filmed having a threesome. But then again, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm discriminating it. But you'll never really know unless you subscribe to The Only Sharks. But anyways, all that said and done, I need to leave that there and move it on to our main topic of this episode, which involves me discussing the idea of the date, which is just odd. Like, if there's a discussion that I feel like has gone on for so long, at this point I feel like it's been going on for maybe about 4 or 5 years. It's the idea of dates and who's paying for the date. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I don't agree with most of you who are like, okay, why do we have to discuss this again and again? Because this is just an ever constant debate that's been going on. Even for me, I flip-flopped around it a couple of different times. I've been on the side of going Dutch. I've been on the side of the guy should pay for the date. I've also been on the side of the woman should pay for the date. And it's been this long-running debate that's kind of been there for a while. But the funniest part about it is, even though most of us would like to drop it and just kind of leave it be, some people want to continue it. And I have an instance where a lady mentioned going for a singles event, and that kind of being something that triggered her quite a bit because of how people reacted. Not necessarily a debate on who is supposed to pay for the date, but rather something that she felt was pretty off. And according to her, the bar is in hell, and men don't want to court anymore. And I'd like to say a lot more regarding this, but instead of doing that, I feel like it would be better if I just let the clip play, then I give my thoughts on it instead. And I think I'll just do that because it's just simpler. And I'll just let the clip play. So without further ado,
men don't want to court anymore. Men don't want to court anymore. And here's why. We're cooked. I don't actually have the answer, but what I will say is, that singles event I went to the other night, the organizer ended up playing a game with all of the singles who attended, and the game was Swipe or Savage. I don't remember what it was called, but basically he made a statement, something related to dating, and then you could either go on the side of the room where you agree, disagree, or you're neutral. And so one of the statements he made was, men should always pay on the first date. Me, being the girl that I am, I think that men should pay for every date, but that's not a conversation I'm ready to have on the internet yet. I went on the side of agree. I do think men should pay on the first date. And it was me and one other woman and one other man. All the other men and women ended up being on the disagree side. And I was like, where are the cameras? In what world are we dating where a man doesn't pick up the tab? At the very least, on the first date, this older gentleman, and you'd think because he's older, he would have like a more traditional view of things. But he basically said, oh, this tradition dates back to when women didn't have employment or any sort of financial independence, and men had the money, they controlled the finances. So of course, when they were courting a woman or taking her out on a chaperoned evening or whatever, of course he would pay for everything because he was the only one with money. And he said, nowadays, women have jobs and they have homes and they have cars. If we're going on a date, why would I pay for anything when we both have our own money? I don't have the bandwidth to explain why that bothers me, but no matter the age, no matter the generation, the bar is in hell. We're seriously, out of the pot and into the frying pan, or whatever they say. I think I'm going to be single for the rest of my life.
Okay. All right. That was pretty interesting. She's had a couple of thoughts on the entire thing. It's just, I don't know. This is more of a rhetorical question than an actual realistic one, because it's not like she's here for me to ask. But you decided that you'll probably stay single forever simply because you didn't want to pick up your own tab? Like, I don't know. Okay, I know it seems like I'm oversimplifying it, and maybe I am, but like, is that really something that is that big of an issue? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, like, men shouldn't pick up the bill or women should pick up the bill or anything of that sort, but at the same time, like, you're telling me that, you choosing to go on a date with someone and they don't want to pay your bill, you believe that if that's the case, then you'd much rather stay single for it. Oh, this is gonna be an interesting one. Okay. Like, it's actually quite wild. And yes, I know this is one of those things where, like, too many women would literally hear me talking about this and be like, no, Denver, it's a man's role, and at least on the first date it should be the man paying, blah blah blah. And you know what, I guess, if it works for you, it works for you. Even some men might be on that side, and if it works for you, it works for you. I'm not saying whether I'm on, like, the going Dutch or the man should pay side, but if it works for you, it works for you, whichever side you choose. All right. And with that said, I probably should be moving on to some of the other stuff she was saying. But the interesting part in that entire sort of context that she gave is the fact that the vast majority of people on the disagreeing side of the idea that the man should pay for the first date, which is interesting. Or at least I personally find it interesting. I'm not entirely sure about the States and, like most other places in the world and everything. Of course, there are regions that are more towards going Dutch, like, I guess Dutch people. And in some cultures, it is actually a thing. Like, you're not really supposed to be sorting out the babe's bill. Like, they, kind of have this agreement where it's like, you handle your share, I handle my share, or some shit like that. And, if that's your area, that's it. But the way I know a lot of people, especially in this part of the world, let me say Kenya, or I could say East Africa, like, the way I know most women, they usually would jump on the side of the man should pay for the first date. That's just how I've seen it growing up. That's how I know it. And so it was a little bit surprising that actually, like, it was just 3 people that were on the side of the man should pay. Now, there is, of course, some level of bias when you kind of think about the entire thing, because considering that it's a singles event, there's a very high likelihood that most of the women that have gone for that are probably women who have tried dating out in, like, the normal world on an everyday basis, and they probably decided at some point, because they realized that they weren't getting such great options, that they should take some compromises as far as, dating is concerned. And like I said around about the conclusion of the last episode, where I was discussing whether you're single by choice or by circumstance, a pretty good part of the reason why a lot of y'all are single by choice is because you guys aren't making certain compromises. So if you want to increase your chances of not being single by choice, maybe making some compromises might actually put you in that direction where, you aren't as single, or at least you aren't single anymore. And I'm guessing for a lot of the people that went for that singles event, the idea of the man paying for the date was a compromise that they were willing to take, or it just seemed small enough of a compromise for them to take as far as getting a good partner is concerned. So I can get why, to some degree, like, there weren't that many women, or at least there weren't women that were on her side at that singles event. Because, at the end of the day, people can talk about being traditional, and people can talk about, I want a man to do this, this, and this for me. But if that's not what the market is giving you, and it seems like a small price to pay, people will gladly pay it if they want to be in a relationship. All right. But anyways, that's just the assumption that I have. But with all of that said, is the bar really in hell because some men don't want to pay on the first date? I wouldn't really say so. I do believe that using the idea of paying for the first date as a marker on whether someone is a good man or not is probably very, very misleading. It's actually one of the reasons why I used to talk about how, the date has kind of lost its value today as opposed to way back in the day. Like, way back in the day when the date was actually an original thing, or like when the date had been going on for a while, it made sense because that was when you would meet up and interact with the potential partner that you want to be with. And it made sense back then, but in today's day and age where communication is quite literally a few seconds and an internet connection away, it kind of mostly defeats the purpose. Plus also, people have realized how to fake most of the elements that would make you look good on a date. Like, that is actually something that, when you kind of think about, is, very, very possible to do. So it doesn't carry as much value in terms of telling you whether someone is going to be a great partner or not, even though it still can, and it's actually not a bad idea. There are some things that will not carry as much value today as they did back in the day. Also, when you think about the idea of the bar being in hell because men don't want to pay, or men are okay with not paying for the first date, I think it's a little bit of an overstep, and it is more of a cultural issue or a refusal to move with the times, as opposed to it actually being something that determines much of anything as far as relationships go. And I can say this because of a fact that I know will piss off quite a number of women, and maybe even some guys, but I believe it'll mostly be the women that might look at me a little bit differently, or might think a little bit differently of me when I say it, even though it is actually the truth. And it's a very unpopular take, and I don't know if anyone has ever really addressed it, but to be completely honest, logically speaking, there is little to no reason for a man to be handling the entire cost of a date in today's day and age. Like, there actually isn't real logic behind any of it, alright? And it's something that's gonna piss someone off, but when you kind of think about it, whatever the hell she was saying about the older guy, speaking about how, dates back in the day were during a time where women weren't making much, blah, blah, blah. Like, everything that guy said was actually true. It was actually dead set true. Like, it was a practice that was based on a time where women were making little to no money. And because of that, and the fact that men were the ones that had the financial power, and men were the ones who were working and making, like a full-on living wage, they were the ones that were supporting the family almost completely, they would be the ones that would end up sorting out the bill. So it made sense back then. But, feminism happened and women asked for equal pay, and they've been making equal pay, but they still want guys to handle the bill? Like, I don't know. Like, is there any logic to that? Or is it just the fact that you guys don't want to sort out the bill? Because that's quite literally the truth behind it. And of course there are exceptions to the whole, there is no logical reason. Like, yes, the little bit is because there are a few exceptions. So, like, for example, if the man earns significantly more, and it is very easily shown that the man earns significantly more, then yeah, it would be a very nice gesture if he was the one to sort out the bill. Because, if he intends on taking care of this woman and he's making significantly more, it makes sense to do that because it has a lower hit to his, disposable income as opposed to the woman's. Then there's also the instance of if it's a transactional sort of relationship and it's known between both parties. Like, for example, if the guy knows that he's busy paying for all of this shit because he's gonna lay pipe, and this babe basically asked for all of those things because she knows that this guy wants pipe, and she's only going to give it to him if, he like takes out and pampers her a little bit, then it makes sense, alright? That one makes complete sense, and, it's kind of like willing buyer, willing seller in that instance. Then also, if he offered to do something that's beyond the woman's spending capacity or disposable income, or even just income, then yeah, let him be the one to sort it out, because clearly he wanted to do that. She was like, okay, that's a little beyond my wheelhouse, and he's like, no, it's fine, I'll even cover the cost. Like, if it's an instance like that, then it makes complete sense. But the whole thing of, because you're a man, you're supposed to pay the bill, like, there isn't any real logic behind it in today's day and age. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying this so that men should stop paying for dates. Like, at the end of the day, relationships are rarely ever governed by pure logic. Otherwise, those relationships would be boring as shit. Like, there is some level of desire, there is some level of want, and there's some level of irrationality that exists in relationships that makes relationships sweet and makes relationships work. All I'm saying is, whenever women come up and they start trying to defend the fact that they want men to pay for dates, I normally just hear a bunch of them talk and they try to justify that shit so many different ways. And most of the time, those arguments are absolute garbage. And it's just that I don't have enough time to talk about it right here, right now. Maybe in the next episode, because I think this woman released a part 2 of this video where she went into the reasons why. And honestly, like, I'd probably want like an entire episode, or I'd probably want at least a section of an episode where I can discuss this, not necessarily when I'm getting towards the end of this entire discussion. Because I think the bigger issue here is that we have women who've become empowered. Like, women are earning good money now. Like, women are earning roughly about the same, sometimes even more than men. And there's this expectation that men should pay. And, you know, there's this entire thing of, oh, you know, if a woman is paying for everything, then she'll disrespect the man. And while I can get that, yes, maybe it's trying to prevent such a thing from happening, doesn't it seem a little bit odd that a man basically has to sort out bills and be a provider just so that he can be respected? Like, it's actually a very wild thing. Mind you, we're at a day and age where costs can be split, where, you know, savings and spending and investments can be done between two people, and they can build a massive financial portfolio and still enjoy the shits out of life if they combine incomes. But still, when you look at it, like, there's still a ton of women that are like, it's a man's role to be the provider. Men have to handle the bills. If I have to handle the bills, then I won't respect you. Or if I'm covering stuff 50-50, then I won't respect you because now you're like a roommate. Like, don't you find that a little bit odd? Because it's like empowered women still want traditional woman treatment even though they are empowered. And I'm not saying that wanting that treatment is bad, it's just the way y'all seem to be acting when you're not getting it because you're empowered. It's wild. It is absolutely wild. But with that said, it does kind of remind me of a statement that I read online about 2 weeks ago, which said something in the tune of, we created empowered women, but we didn't teach the world how to deal with empowered women. Which, when I think about it, is actually a very true statement, because yes, empowered women were basically created, and, you know, it's been a good thing. You know, I don't think most women would want to go back. And, you know, it's amazing that a lot of women have become empowered, but they are living in a world expecting that they'll still be treated to some level like traditional women, and society and the world is basically still trying to, you know, be traditional to them, which hasn't worked out all that great in some aspects as well as others. And the hope is that one side caves in as well as the other, because, you know, we want empowered women on this end, but, you know, these empowered women want to be treated like traditional women to some degree on this end. Or you find that, you know, like, they'll want to take away the empowered woman and make them more traditional, but it's not like the empowered woman wants to stop being empowered. So it's almost like we're at a bit of an impasse when it comes to some issues as well as others. But all in all, like, empowered women right now are relying on tradition to hold this up, and it's not really something that we'd want to admit, but I feel like it's something that we probably should. Which brings me to the conclusion of all of this, which is, whatever your stance on paying for a date is, let's not forget, both of these genders are earning about the same amount of money, alright? So understand why you'd want to stick to one side of this or the other and stand by it, but don't flip-flop around trying to justify shit using logic that doesn't fucking exist. Or maybe some of this logic actually does exist. Maybe it does. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I haven't fully understood this, and, you know, maybe I'm just chatting a bunch of shit. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the breaktime podcast. On X, it is at bagakthed. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end of this episode, which I might actually even continue the part 2 on this entire thing next time. But either way, I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.